Guine úsla agus a cóide, is mis an talamh pádraig go Guire uachtarán acadamh riamh na hÉireann, agus tá anachas orm fáilte a chorómh go léir go dtí an acadamh inniu. That's me speaking in Irish, and I'll translate that. My name is Pat Guiry, and it's a real honour as President of the Royal Irish Academy to welcome you here to the Academy this evening for an in-conversation piece with two Nobel Prize winners in chemistry. I'll start by welcoming in a very special way Frances Arnold and Dave MacMillan. Thank you very much for doing this evening. A few words about the... Oh, you can clap that if you like. Yes, yeah. I think the audience is already behind you, so that's a very good start. A few words about the Royal Irish Academy. This is the Academy for Sciences. It's a national academy, the whole island of Ireland, and it covers the sciences, the arts, humanities, and social sciences as well. So we have about 650 members, and recognition as a member is one of the highest academic achievements that we give in Ireland. In terms of this particular building, I think you might like to know a little bit about it because I think it's one of the most special rooms in Ireland. The Academy was given this house in the late 1850s, and at this stage it was a detached house, and where you're sitting now and the library just behind you that you came through to get here, that was a garden. So, paint paradise and put up a parking lot, or whatever the phrase is. But certainly and the reason behind building that library and this was mainly for an exhibition, because the Royal Irish Academy holds about 80,000 pamphlets and books, some of the most important books in the Irish history. So we've on Cathach, which is the oldest Irish writing on vellum. So we have many really important historical pamphlets, and many people coming from around the world to work in our library and use the facilities that we have here. This was designed a little bit like Houston Station, as it turns out, in London. It was the same architect, and it was originally designed as an exhibition space. And the background to that, in 1853, just after the Crystal Palace exhibition, Ireland hosted a grand exhibition here in 1853, and during that time, a lot of the really important artifacts that the Academy held were given as part of that for the exhibition, and that allowed us to build on the garden. And so they include the Cross of Cong, the Ardagh Chalice, some of the most important gold artifacts in Ireland that are now in the National History Museum, or the National Museum of Ireland, I should say, as well as all of the very important paintings. And with the Royal Dublin Society, we set up the National Gallery of Ireland. And all of those buildings are based now close to where government buildings are in Kildare Street. So in terms of the Academy, as I said, there are about 650 members. We have about 10 interdisciplinary committees that cover the whole broad range of science, humanities, arts, and social sciences as well. And in addition, then, there's many important research programs that happen within the Academy. So Folklore Snúr na Gaeilge, it's about developing the dictionary for the Irish language, which evolves over time. But also we do important things like the Dictionary of Irish Biography. So you get in there 10 years after you die, so, let's wait a while for that, I have to say. And it's a recognition to be involved in the Dictionary of Irish Biography. So we've lots of other things like the Irish Historic Town Atlas, where we monitor the development of towns and cities across the island by looking at the maps. And that's a really fantastic thing. With the publications office here, so there's so many things going on in the Academy. This is one of the first times we have an in-conversation with. So I have to say, I'm really looking forward to it personally. I hope you enjoy the evening. And the way this will run is that I will chat with Frances and Dave, and the first part of the chat will be about their career up to becoming a PI, at which point I will then pass over to the audience if they want to ask any questions based on that period of their lives. Then their work as a PI and what happened in order for them to be awarded the Nobel Prize, what motivated them, what interested them in the area that they started to work in. That'll be the second third of the chat. And again, I'll pass over at that stage for people to ask questions from the audience. And the final piece then, of course, will be life past the Nobel. So what has changed and how exactly has it changed? So that's the order of events. Enjoy the evening, and thank you very much. very comfortable seats. That's a very important thing for a conversation like this. So perhaps, Francis, I can start with you, if that's all right. Very interesting early life in terms of how you got to doing a PhD, as you mentioned at your fantastic lecture this evening in chemical engineering. But as you said, you've not got a license for chemistry, so maybe you can explain that particular phrase and how it was you ended up at Princeton University as an undergraduate.
Pat, I tried everything to stay out of chemistry. I started off as a mechanical and aerospace engineer at the end of the Vietnam War, and there wasn't much demand for aerospace engineering. So I went into solar energy because we had just gone through an energy crisis and wars, and it was a big mess in energy, and we had a president whose goal was 20% renewable energy by the year 2000. That was Jimmy Carter. I bought into that. Only then changed presidents. Reagan came in. The cars got long again. The solar collectors came off the roof. And so I said, it's time for graduate school.
Good idea.
But I lived all over the world. I tried everything, and then I fell into chemistry.
Now, when you say you've been all over the world, maybe you could let the audience know about just what exactly you did for the years before you became an undergraduate student at Princeton, because it's interesting. It's an interesting story, I think.
Well, before I went to college, I lived on my own. I lied about my age, and I worked as everything from a pizza parlor person to a cocktail waitress to a taxi driver. Tried a lot of jobs I didn't like. I recommend young people try jobs you don't like. It'll cure you of ever wanting to do that. You can move on to the jobs you do like. But then I moved to Italy and Spain, and I had some jobs I didn't like there, but I really liked Italy and Spain. I worked in Brazil, I worked in South Korea. So I tried a lot of things, but I never found the part of engineering I really liked until I went to graduate school.
Wow, gosh. And we have a transition year program in Ireland where students at the age of about 15, 16 take a year off from their studies, and they're supposed to get work experience and find out a little bit more about themselves. I think you had a pretty impressive transition year there, Francis.
So I think the message, though, is that even if you don't like it, it's important knowledge.
Yes.
It's like money in the bank, to just try things.
And all experience is experience. That's true. So Dave, maybe I'll pass over to you in terms of growing up in Glasgow, and how did you end up doing chemistry, I suppose, and what was your pathway like?
Yeah, I think my story's a lot duller than that, so I'll start off with. So I was a young kid. As my father would say, he's a curious kid. That doesn't mean to say I'm curious. It just means I was strange. But I wasn't really interested in science at all. But then when I was a younger kid, my brother did something which I think was pretty remarkable, which was he decided he wanted to go to university. And we didn't know anyone who'd ever gone to university. No one in my school had ever gone to university, or my town. And it was pretty controversial because my dad was a steel worker, my mom was a home help, and they were completely convinced he was just trying to avoid going to work in the steelworks, which was almost certainly true, actually. Yeah. But he was determined, and he went off and he did a degree in physics. And the day he got his degree, he got a job that paid more money than my dad after 30 years in the steelworks. Yeah. So on that day, around about then, my mum and dad came to see me and said, "You're going to university."
There you go.
So I always tell people my biggest educational, biggest career decision wasn't made by me, it was made by my mum and dad, telling me, or my brother. But I went off to university, and the formula was I had to do physics, because that's what my brother did, and so that was what you would do. And I was absolutely terrible at physics. I mean, it was just terrible, still am. And I was so bad at it, I really didn't like university, and I tried to leave, and I was so bad at interviewing for jobs, I couldn't get a job. But fortunately, in my second year, as part of the curriculum, I had to do chemistry and organic chemistry. And I always tell people, it was maybe the way for Francis, this as well, it was like nothing seemed to make any sense, and then suddenly there was this thing, organic chemistry. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And it was amazing, and I think, it's for other organic chemists feel the same way. People always tell you it's really hard and it's really difficult, but for some reason you find it pretty normal and reasonable. And that's what it was like for me. And it was just, from there, it was, I decided I got my degree in chemistry, loved it, decided I wanted to come to America because, and I always tell young people this, education and your degree is a passport to the world. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to go to America because I loved American sports and I loved American television. And things like Starsky and Hutch and Cheers and things like that were just,
You're really, aging yourself.
I know.
Dave.
But that's basically, through that, I got to go and do my PhD in America, and that's how I ended up doing that.
And in terms of your chemistry lectures, I read somewhere that you actually missed the lecture on enantiomers and the importance of asymmetric synthesis. I think there might have been a Scottish football match on at the time. Was that right?
That's absolutely 100% true. So the day that the Nobel Prize I won was based upon asymmetric catalysis, and that whole lecture class, I missed it because I was watching Scotland play Cyprus in a World Cup qualifier. And fortunately, the professor who taught it he saw me the next day and he said, I didn't see you. And I was like, well, I was off watching the football. And he gave me a really, really hard time and said, you have to learn this. This is going to be important. Yeah. And it was. So I was very fortunate that very fortunate that he impressed that upon me.
But sometimes not learning it is good, because then you invent something new.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, there's a weird sort of blend between you want to know enough, but you don't want to know too much. Right. So if you don't know too much, you won't try things because we overbelieve or we think we have more knowledge than we really do. Yeah. So I 100%
I've definitely been accused of not knowing enough.
Yeah, I'm accused of that almost every day by my wife, actually.
Hi, Jean, you're very welcome. But that's a good point, actually, in terms of if you got a lecture about it and you thought, well, that's all done and dusted, there's nothing new to learn here. It's what the lecturer said. There are mirror image compounds, and they are not the same as far as the body's concerned. But that's the end of the story. So I think that's important to point that out as well.
You came from a long line of chemists, right?
Well, not really, actually. I was, again, the first of my family to go to university and grew up on a farm in the lovely south part of Tipperary, the Golden Vale, although that's a misnomer because it should be the Golden Vein because the land is good. So I grew up milking cows and feeding calves. So
how do you end up in catalysis?
Francis, who's doing the conversation here? I mean,
it's a conversation.
It's a conversation. Well, if you want to throw the ball back to me, I'm willing to catch it as well. I had an interest in science. I think growing up on a farm, you see how nature behaves and you see the cycle of life, and you're kind of interested and curious, if you want to use that word, as to what exactly it all means. I did the 3 leaving certificate subjects of science: chemistry, maths, and chemistry, biology, and physics, I should say, which was strange at the time in school. And then, as it turns out, my 2 sisters had started to live in Dublin, so I decided to apply to Dublin to do science. And after the first year, which is quite general, it was really only at the end of second year that, if I use the term, it clicked. Now, click chemistry is a completely different concept that won the Nobel Prize, as you all know, a few years ago, but that's completely different. It just felt right, and I understood it, and I love being in the lab. So that's how I ended up in chemistry. And I've tried to bring that enthusiasm to my PhD students, many of whom are in the audience, that it's a bit of fun, and really you can extend your knowledge of an area through the work of fantastic students. So that's kind of where I ended up. Good. Right, that was embarrassing. Okay, now I've lost my train of thought completely. So I suppose, were there any teachers at any stage at the second level or third level that really impressed you, that made an impact on you? Maybe I'll ask Francis first.
I never went to school.
Okay, well, yeah, but then, I read you completely aced the SATs, and why did you apply to Princeton? I know it's a very good university, Dave, but why did you apply to Princeton?
I wanted to get out of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Pittsburgh in the 1950s and 1960s was a very sad place. It was a dying industrial city. Steel workers were out of work. Everything was shutting down. Pittsburgh was a great place to be from. So I was happy to go to college and just get out of the nasty jobs that I was doing. And I always assumed I would go to college. My father was a PhD physicist, so it was in the family.
Yes, yes. The acorn does not fall far from the tree. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before.
Definitely have heard it.
Yeah.
But he told me, so he said to me, Frances, no one will ever want to marry you, so make sure that you do something that will get you a job. And he said, to be a mechanical engineer. So I applied in mechanical engineering, and I got a degree in mechanical engineering. And you know what? I've always had a job.
Parents are right. Most of the time, I think parents are right. That's absolutely true. And in terms of, once you'd finished that degree then in mechanical engineering and aeronautics, you then worked abroad for a while, is that right?
I worked in Italy building stress analysis for nuclear pressure vessels. Italy was great. That was really boring. I worked in Spain doing similar things. I worked in Brazil doing solar energy things. I worked in Colorado as a solar energy engineer, but then I had to change careers because of the Reagan administration came in. I said, oops. But you know, it's great to try things, and even if you're older, so I was 25 then, and I just said, okay, I'll go to graduate school. I'll go do something else. And I never planned this linear route, right? I'm going to be this one day. I just took the next steps, but I always had my eyes open for opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's important. I mean, too many people give advice that is linear, but ultimately go with what interests you, and you never know where you might end up.
My advice has always been, don't do what all the other monkeys are doing.
Right.
I have 3 sons, and I keep telling them that, but it doesn't do any good.
Right. Okay. Oh, to be a parent. So, Dave, in terms of in Glasgow University, were there any lectures that stood out or that made an impact? And maybe in answering that question, you liked to go to America for a PhD, but of course it's a broad church. Where do you go? Who do you go to work with? I mean, that's a very important decision.
Yeah, no, I was a guy I did some of my undergraduate studies with. His name was Ernie Colvin, who passed away many years ago. But I always remember whenever I was asking him about going to America to do a PhD, and all the other professors had said, don't do it, stay in Scotland. It's 3 years, it's faster, you'd be crazy not to. But this guy, Ernie Colvin, he sat me down and he told me, it was a very confusing conversation, but he basically told me about a road trip he did through California and all the parties he went to. And I kept waiting for him to get to the science part, and then it turns out that was it. That was it. That was the motivation. And it worked. So, but in terms of teachers, probably in primary school, I had a teacher who taught 2 different years, and her name was Miss McKean, and she was a very, very scary woman. Right. But she was fantastic. And one of the things I think is also true in Ireland is there's a great respect for education. Yes. Even though people might not have a lot of money, they might be from very working class backgrounds, they do really, really care about education. Yeah. And that was certainly the way it was in our village and at our school. And she was one of those people who made you have respect for education. And she was really, she was a fantastic teacher.
Yeah. So if we move forward then to the graduate school, so after mechanical engineering, you wanted to stay, Frances, in the engineering space, but moved towards chemical engineering, and you applied to Berkeley. So what was the decision process behind that?
Well, then I finally ended up in heaven. So I moved from various purgatories into a heavenly thing. And what was wonderful about Berkeley was that it was the beginning of the DNA revolution. So I was on the bio side. I was going to work on biofuels. There was a previous generation of biofuels back in the 70s. And they, instead of doing biofuels, I ended up working on this new industry called recombinant DNA. And I did the chemical engineering process development for recombinant DNA, which gave me an introduction to biochemistry and parts of chemistry that I had never appreciated. And I learned about enzymes. And I said,
they're
I
not
want to be an
important.
engineer of the biological world. That's the kind of engineer that I want. I want to build new biology. And there were great people doing that all around me.
And the PCR, was that at the same time, or was that a little bit later?
That was later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it true then, because of your lack of chemistry degree, that the chemical engineers suggested that you should maybe take some chemistry undergraduate courses? Is that right?
So I took all the chemistry undergraduate courses up through organic chemistry, but you know what? I did the Black Lightning notes, which was the student notes for all the organic chemistry classes. So I took organic chemistry and took the notes for Heathcock, Volhard, Rappaport, you name it. I must have done it 8 times. So I learned a lot of organic chemistry.
And I'd say they were fantastic teachers as well.
Oh, well, they were wonderful teachers. And so it wasn't boring. And I thought organic chemistry was like puzzle building. It was wonderful.
And the focus then of your PhD itself, what was that?
No, that was still process
Still
development.
process,
I didn't start engineering enzymes till I went to Caltech on my own as a PI.
Right. Okay. So that, and Dave, same about you. So, University of California at Irvine said yes.
Yeah, no. So my wife's heard this story so many times. I sent 19 airmail envelopes to 19 different professors in America, and 18 of them did not respond. But one guy at UC Irvine responded. His name is Hal Moore, and it basically sent me an application form, and I filled out the application form, and I got in. And I always remember that day as well, because they sent you the TA stipend, which was going to be your salary for being a student. And it was also more money than what my father made as a steelworker. And my father was completely convinced that this was a mistake. And he made me call up the international office at UC Irvine to talk to this woman. I always remember her name was Betty White, which is kind of an interesting name. And I was talking to her, and she couldn't understand the word I was saying. You know, this was going on for like at least 15, 20 minutes. And eventually she said to me, look, I know many languages. Can you try speaking in your native tongue? And I said, this is all I've got. But anyway, so off I went to UC Irvine, and it was very similar. It was just a revelation. It was incredible. The teachers were spectacular. It felt like the world had sort of opened up and interesting in different ways. It was obviously Southern California. It's incredible. You're doing all this amazing research. You're getting these amazing teachers. Then you go off and you play beach volleyball at the weekend. I mean, It was pretty good. And I discovered I had an accent. I didn't realize in Glasgow that I had an accent, but it turns out I do. Yes. So that also was, it's unique to be in America with a Scottish accent or an Irish accent.
Yes, they do love the Irish and Scottish accents. There's no doubt. Yeah, no, absolutely. So perhaps we'll pause there for a moment, and again, if I could now turn around to the audience and ask you if you'd like to ask any questions of Francis or Dave. There are microphones, I believe, that can be brought around, so don't be shy. There's bound to be some questions, come on. Yes, Evie. Hold on a second, the microphone is just on its way. Yeah, thanks. Students always ask the best questions, actually.
So this is a question for both of you, coming from a PhD student. Do you remember a particular bottleneck in your PhD project, how long that bottleneck went on for, and what the day was like when you maybe solved it or decided to drop it and move on?
Yeah, I mean, for me, during my PhD, I was to do both methodology and total synthesis. Total synthesis is where you have to make a molecule that someone has arbitrarily chosen for you, and you have to make it. And I was just stuck at this one step for probably 6 months or something. And bizarrely and completely out of the blue, someone just publishes this paper. It was in JOC at the time, using tantalum, a very strange metal, that happened to be exactly the thing I needed. And I remember showing it to my boss, Overman, and he was like, that's never going to work. And then we went off and tried it, and it worked basically that day. So it was one of those things that wasn't really any inspiration on our part. It was just the fact that we actually could read and see the literature. But it was this thing where you sort of do develop, I think, you deal with a lot of failure along the way, and you do develop resiliency. It's part of your PhD. That's one of the skill sets you learn, is how to put up with it not working, because you believe in the light at the end of the tunnel, which always remarkably shows up, right? So I think that was one of the sort of skill sets that you sort of learn from going through those moments.
Great, thanks, Evie. Yes, Laura?
Hi, thanks so much. So,
Sorry, Laura, could you just wait a second, because I think Francis has to answer that question as well. Sorry. Sorry. Thanks, Sterling.
My story is a bit different. I had a PI, my PhD advisor, who was, this is in engineering, so he was off building companies to support this new industry. And I was left on my own to do my own PhD, so I had no trouble doing it. It was mostly applied mathematics. But at the end of my PhD, I looked around and I said, oh, I could get a job at Genentech, or I could get a job, it's anywhere in the world. And I said, I want his job. He's not doing anything. And I said, I could be a professor, because really, what do they do? I had no clue how, he was pulling together all the funding and the general area, and I really was ignorant. So I said, I want to be a professor.
Yep, good, great. Laura, over to you.
So you both, in different ways, have perhaps unorthodox backgrounds for people who go on to do PhDs and go further. So from working class backgrounds, or traveling all over the world and being a cab driver. Did that ever affect people's perceptions of you? Did that affect you in return? How did that impact your progression?
It gave me a lot of confidence. I think I was born overconfident, and I kind of kept it as I went. And the other thing is that it gave me this wonderful power of letting criticism go in this ear and get out that ear. And I'm very good at taking criticism and the pieces that are useful and totally ignoring the rest. I really don't care what you think about that, if I believe that it's true or that it's important.
That's a really good question, and I would say slightly dangerous question, because I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to answer this the way I want to answer it. I think, how do I say this the right way? So growing up, working class, with a Scottish accent, I don't think it puts you necessarily, in the United Kingdom, I can't speak for Ireland, but in the United Kingdom, I don't think it puts you in the best necessarily situation with respect to climbing up the ladder of the educational system. That's maybe an overstatement, but that's the way I feel. But the thing which I fell backwards into, just because of naivety, I think, was I ended up going to the USA. And the one thing I do believe in America, and maybe I just believe that because I did it, is in America they don't care. They don't care if you come from Scotland. They don't care if you have an accent. The only thing they really care about is what can you do? What are you good at? Can you accomplish it? They'll give you an opportunity. If you don't succeed, then, well, they won't listen to you. But if you do succeed, they will listen to you. So it really is, in my opinion, and that's not to say it's a perfect system. There's a lot of flaws in the American system, but it is still a very strong meritocracy in science, I believe. And there's a lot of people who are still discriminated against within the American system, but at least in terms of your background and where you grew up and things like that, I think it's very good in that way. And I tend to strongly believe in that. So I think there can be and there could be, but yeah, I do believe a lot in the benefits of getting out and getting outside your own country and going to doing a PhD in other places, especially places where they put a value on what you can actually accomplish.
Great. One final question at this section. Perhaps not. Okay, great. So we'll move on then to getting your assistant professorship, going out as an independent PI. So Francis, you went straight down to Caltech. What a fantastic place to start.
I did 1 year postdoc with Nacho Tinoco, a well-known biophysicist, because I thought I was going to engineer proteins. I knew that I'd spent my PhD designing processes around natural proteins and realized that's the wrong way to do it. One should design the proteins for the process. And so that was my idea, only I had no clue how to actually do that. And I ended up at Caltech and said, oh no, I've got 5 years to prove that I can do this. And, evolution takes a little bit longer than 5 years. So I was scrambling, absolutely scrambling. But it was entirely my idea. It was entirely my job to implement it. And that was scary. That was really scary.
And at Caltech, you were in not the Department of Chemistry as such, but it was chemical engineering.
Chemical engineering, which is a subgroup of the chemistry division.
Right.
But we're a separate group, separate PhD program. Yeah.
And did you find many interactions with colleagues across chemistry or not?
Most of them just said, why is that even interesting?
Gosh,
Yeah.
visionaries. Yeah, well.
They were very skeptical.
Yeah. And in terms of engineering, one always sees as a very much a male-dominated environment. Was that the case in Caltech
Oh, I was
at the
the
time?
first woman ever hired in chemical engineering at Caltech. I was the 9th in history at the whole institute.
Gosh.
So there were no women, but I was used to that. I have 4 brothers. I was used to doing things that only men would do. That was not the problem. The problem was that I didn't use the resources as much as I could have, right? That I should have integrated more into the great community of chemistry. Fantastic chemists at Caltech, but I kind of stayed separate. They didn't trust enzymes. They thought that, enzymes was cheating.
Well, clearly not, though. It's not cheating at all. And were there any particular circumstances that you found challenging and that you felt that as a female academic that you weren't being taken seriously, or did you have to fight against the system?
No,
and how did you do that?
I never felt that I was not taken seriously. I think people just didn't really like what I was doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so Dave, for you, after your PhD, you was a postdoc with Dave Evans.
Yeah, so I went to Harvard to work for Dave Evans, which was incredibly intimidating. Probably the 2 hardest years of my life was being at Harvard because it was just insanely intense. And the competition was as people think of Harvard as it is. But in some ways it was good, sort of toughened you up. In other ways it was still rough because you sort of learned. It was good as you learned how you don't want to run your group and things like that. You don't want it to be so brutal to people along the way. And then I had to apply for jobs, and I sent my proposals round and I interviewed broadly. And I remember I just wanted a job at UC Santa Barbara. That's all I wanted. I wanted to get back to California. I wanted a job at UC Santa Barbara. And then I ended up getting jobs at Berkeley and MIT. I was like, oh crap, because there was that.
Most people would not say that, Dave.
Well, there's that moment where you realize, what are you going to do? Because you can't turn away from it. You have to just keep going, even though you think, this is where you get found out. This is the part where it all falls apart. And so that was how I ended up going to Berkeley, and as much as what Frances was saying when she went there for her PhD. I mean, Berkeley is such an insanely amazing place.
Yes.
And the thing that blew me away at Berkeley was just everyone there was very generous with respect to caring about young people coming through and helping them grow their careers. And I was very close to Clayton Heathcock and people like that. And it was just a fantastic experience. And it was quite opposite from other experiences I'd had along the way.
Yeah.
And it was just such a great atmosphere and a great time. And still to this day, my closest friends are at Berkeley. So yeah. I left because Caltech made me an offer.
You could not refuse.
Southern California is still Southern California.
Yeah. So in terms of identifying when you're applying for jobs, you have to have research proposals, and I know in asymmetric catalysis you spend a lot of your time with a glove box at Harvard with scandium or bisoxazoline ligands to beat the band. So you did not want to work in that area. So what was it that sort of piqued your interest in your first few projects, which turned out to be very important?
I don't know how you know this stuff, Pat. It's like, you know too much.
Yeah.
No, basically what it was I was at Harvard. I had to work in this glove box every single day, and I learned an enormous amount, but you basically have your arms stuck in this contraption for 8 hours a day, and after 2 years of this, you think, there's got to be some other way of doing this.
Yeah.
And
Get grad students to do it.
get somebody else. So my great insight was I just don't want to have my arms stuck in a glove box for too much, but it was basically this thinking about, what does that mean? Why are we doing this? Why does everyone, apart from enzymes. Why do we have to do this with metals in this way? And it just didn't make any sense. It seemed like it was sort of anti-common sense. So that's what started me down the path of thinking about using small organic molecules, because if you go into any chemistry lab, the organic molecules are not in the contraption, they're not in the glove box, they're out beside the humans, out in the normal atmosphere. So that to me seemed like that was just common sense as an idea that we should be using those small molecules to do catalysis.
Yeah.
I think that's what we share in common. We did what was obvious to it. It was absolutely obvious to me that enzymes were going to rule the world. Now, the question is when, but it seemed obvious to me. And
Yeah.
just like you, it was obvious to you that this would be a technology that was needed. Yet we were both on the lunatic fringe.
As someone who works with metals on this side of the audience, I won't start an argument about it, but certainly from the environmentally friendly and greener approach, there's no doubt that they're outstanding. And Dave, in terms of your first project, in terms of trying to develop an organocatalytic Diels-Alder reaction, and the Yahoo moment when you saw not just the NMR, but actually probably the chiral HPLC of the product, how did that feel?
Yeah, it was. So it was kind of funny because I'd asked this fantastic young woman in my group, named Kateria Rent, to run this reaction, and I only asked her to do it because I'd 8 people in my. I took too many graduate students my first year. I had 9 graduate students in my first year, and 8 of them were working on this other stuff, and it was actually working, but it wasn't that. And there was this one really great graduate student, but her part wasn't working, so I gave her this project thinking, it's a Yahoo idea, it's never going to work. But she came back and she showed it to me. And I sort of, even though the person I worked for at Harvard, Dave Evans, I said it was a tough time, the guy was an absolute genius. He was an absolute genius of organic chemistry, but he used to give out pieces of advice. Some were good, some were terrible. His terrible piece of advice was, if a student ever has a great result, don't show them that you're excited. Which to this day, I still don't know why he told me that. Anyway, so this student comes up and shows me that this organic molecule has done the Diels-Alder reaction in this high EE. And I remember sort of nodding at her, and I said, excuse me. And I left the lab, and went into my office, closed the door, closed the blinds, and then jumped up and down for 5 minutes. And then basically opened the office door, walked back out to see her and say, well, that EE is not high enough, we need to make it higher.
Yeah. Very good. But you're probably thinking, tenure track, here I come, tick.
Yeah, no, that was, it was funny because people always say, did you know you were going to win a Nobel Prize? I was like, no, I don't. It was basically, I called my wife at the time and said, I think we're going to get tenure. I think that was because, and it's funny in America, as Francis said, you get 5 to 6 years to do something. And if you don't do something reasonably exciting, they tell you, we're going to fire you, which tends to sharpen the mind quite well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, that was that moment of like, oh, I might not get fired.
Yeah.
This is quite good. Yeah.
And did you see the potential at that stage, or was it just an open field?
I think we did. I mean, the thing I always go back to is we decided it was going to be a field, and we named it with one reaction, which I think was a little bit cocky, if you think about it in retrospect. But we also announced in our first paper how it was going to do all these different things, even though we'd only done one reaction, which in retrospect is ridiculously stupid thing to do. But fortunately, it played out, but it was...
And you got credit for it all.
I got credit for it all because we announced this and then and called it a name and all this different things. So it was an interesting moment, I would say. And one thing I would definitely tell young people is whenever you're doing things, make sure you don't try and compartmentalize it, make it small. Make sure you're telling the world how big you think this idea is. It's extremely important to do that.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And Francis, in terms of your own career then starting in Caltech, you've described it, what were the key projects? I mean, obviously it was designing and engineering enzymes with directed evolution, and the technology was there to exploit it. But how did you zone in on which particular process and which particular class of enzymes? Perhaps if you could tell us a little bit
Well,
about
actually, I started off with several stupid projects, which didn't earn the respect of the chemists. I worked on metal ion recognition, and I worked on designing proteins to bind metals. They were hard problems, and I was pretty good at it, but Caltech, the the tenure criteria are you have to be the best in the world in your age group. That's a pretty high bar. And I realized I was never going to be the best in the world at any of those things. And when directed evolution, I saw the first results of this and realized that these mutations were happening where no one could explain them. I realized I could make a field and be the best in the world at it because it's a brand new field. And I knew it was going to solve problems that no one else knew how to solve.
Great. And in terms of key publications and funding, did you get supported by the NIH?
I never had trouble.
NSF?
No, NIH, I never had money because I don't work on human medicine. I work
Right.
on planet medicine. But I never had trouble getting funding because what I do is really useful. In fact, the first adopters of my technology were, Procter and Gamble for laundry detergents. But that's good money because you get good money. You get instant gratification when your products get used, and you get time and experience from other scientists. So I was really happy about that. The chemists at Caltech, you were not there yet, but the chemists at Caltech were not impressed. But the engineers were, and I was getting tenure in engineering.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, make sure you're in the right place to get tenure correct. And Dave, in terms of maybe the commercial applications of the work that you developed, I mean, did you form strong relationships with many companies? Did you do spin-outs at that stage or not?
A little bit. I mean, I was very lucky because early on, a lot of different pharmaceutical companies asked me to come in and consult with them and talk to them. And I think so you could sort of go in there and give them a little bit of propaganda about, you should really be doing this. And which is good. But what was great was pharma gravitated towards wanting to use it anyway because it is very, very inexpensive and it's recyclable, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it was a sort of natural fit for them. But Francis said something there since we're in a conversation I totally agree with, and I think it's really important to point out and emphasize, especially for younger people who are getting into sciences, this business about doing something different and not getting funded for it, which is so true, and it happens all the time. And I was telling my wife this other day, we just put in our 15th or 16th year in an area we worked on called photoredox, and it got wonderful reviews and a great score and all these different comments. And I went back and showed my group all these comments, but I showed them the first time we submitted our grant, and the comments were quite different. And it was basically everyone said, this will never be useful, no one will ever care, and all these different things. And I think one of the things which is absolutely true about human nature, when something's really new and different, it's hard for people to necessarily think this is going to be, or see that conceptual leap. And so funding agencies tend to have a hard time, or reviewers have a hard time. So that's one of the things, going back to that earlier question about maybe resolve, that especially as a young academic, you have to have a lot of resolve to see it through, because at the beginning especially, it's going to be hard for people to see the idea through your eyes the way that you're seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, the funding application starts with a concept. You can't always have the proof of concept, and you don't have the results to back it up yet. That's why you want the funding. So it's a chicken and egg scenario, that's for sure. Good. So in terms of developing your group and looking at areas, Francis, did you change at any stage as you went along? I mean, obviously you stayed in the same area, but was there different focus at any stage in terms of what you started to look at?
Sure.
Once you had the technology.
Every 5 to 10 years, I would take on a very different set of problems, but it's always been through the eye of evolution. So evolution is the most powerful design process ever invented, bar none.
Yep.
And it's foolish to move away from it for me.
Yes.
But you can apply it to very different kinds of problems. So 20 years ago, we worked on biofuels, and the company we started to make sustainable aviation fuel is still in business.
Right.
It doesn't make any money, but it makes a lot of aviation fuel. and then we moved into insect sex pheromones, and that company is still in business to replace pesticides. Then about 10 years ago, I really wanted to change the way chemistry was done, and I moved into this field of non-natural catalysis, using enzymes to do chemical reactions that humans invented, but nature never did, and do it better than the humans. So I told the audience today I want to replace them with microbes. So that's been the last 10 years.
Very good. And Dave, I mean, once the asymmetric organocatalysis had played its way for a number of years, you mentioned photoredox catalysis, but I mean, from the literature, those two were very intrinsically linked. So maybe how did the thought processes for those come about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's funny because now, if you look at least to my mind, there's two areas that my group has heavily worked on: organocatalysis and photoredox. And at least now, if you look at them, they look quite different now. But there was this kind of bridge that actually happened in this sort of moment. But for me, at least, this is the part I go back to. You know, Francis was saying evolution. For me, it's chemical reactivity, which what I mean by that is ways in which you can see that there's a way that chemistry can happen, or a reactivity principle that really is not at all well understood, but potentially could impact lots and lots and lots of new chemical reactions, not ones which are known, not ones that are known in the literature, but just completely new chemical reactions. And every now and again, and for at least for me, it feels like every 10 years, that seems to happen, where one of these reactivity principles will show up. And I think for me, that's the exciting part, which is how do you sort of find those, at least try find those things and directions to go with it.
So do you think AI will do that one day? So half my group is now machine learning and AI, because evolution is perfectly designed for that. It's algorithmic and we can use AI. Do you think AI will do new reactivity principles?
I mean, I think it's hard to bet against AI, at least if you give it any time span. It depends on what the time span is. You know, if is it 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? I think it'll happen at some point. For me at the moment, for chemical reactivity, it feels like chemical reactivity for AI is really optimization. And that's an incredibly important thing. If you're trying to make a drug for the human race, being able to optimize that is extraordinarily important, unbelievably important. But in terms of finding new chemical reactions, it's hard at the moment because you'd have to teach it patterns of what new reactions look like, but by definition, those reactions are new. So it maybe doesn't have the data to which to find them. One thing I think AI could really do a great job on is not the answers, but maybe the questions. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the world's resources of what is available to us right now, broadly speaking, if you ask the AI, if you could take these kind of molecules and these kind of molecules and somehow be able to join them together, this should be extraordinarily economically valuable and important and useful. And then it becomes down to the chemist or whoever to say, okay, how in the hell am I going to join these two types of molecules together? But at least it's posing the problem. I think a lot of times as chemists, we kind of do chemical reactions, but we kind of like or fall into, as opposed to saying, you know what we should be solving? We should be solving this reaction. So we don't do it sometimes with enough purpose, and I think AI could help us gain that purpose.
Right, yeah, excellent. So No, absolutely not. No, not at all. So the Nobel Prize Committee called in 2018, and I remember reading at some stage when Donald Cram was awarded the Nobel Prize, that the committee called a Donald Cram in Los Angeles the wrong Donald Cram. And the answer was, well, actually, I'm a petrol pump attendant. I didn't think my work was so important globally. So this was pre-internet, as you can imagine, so they got the wrong name in the phone book. They didn't get the wrong name with you, Francis, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about the day and what followed maybe in the day or two after.
I was sound asleep in a hotel room in Dallas, Texas, getting ready to give a seminar at UT Southwestern. I didn't make any assumptions about a Nobel Prize, because you know what? At any one time, there's 500 people who think they deserve a Nobel Prize. There's 50 who think they're going to get it. And if you think you're the one who's going to get it, you're foolish, right? So I was sound asleep, and the phone rings. Can you hold on for the Secretary General of the Swedish Royal Academy? And you know the response is yes. But then they told me I couldn't call home couldn't call anybody for 20 minutes. This is 4 o'clock in the morning in the United States. So I was wavering between trying to find a cup of coffee and taking a shower, so I took the shower. But then when I finally called home, I couldn't reach anybody because it's 2 o'clock in the morning in California. And my children, I keep my phone on because I had children at home, and my children don't keep their phones on. So actually 3 hours later, my older son answers the phone and says, "What do you want, Mom?" So that was the beginning of my day, a very, very long day. I had to fly back to California, press conferences and all that.
Sure.
But it was, and my kids all came, so that was great.
Great. And Dave, you had to suffer a similar time difference from Stockholm.
Yeah, mine was a little bit better time difference. Mine was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I apologise to my wife, who's now heard this story 1,000 times.
Sorry, Jane.
But it was 5 o'clock in the morning. We're lying in bed in Princeton, and I start to feel this elbow getting into my ribs as we're lying in bed. And she goes, "Your phone keeps buzzing. Your phone keeps buzzing." She doesn't have a Scottish accent, but that's what it sounded like to me. So and I was too tired, so I didn't get up. But she went round the bed and picked up my phone and moved it from the bedside table over at the window ledge to get it as far away as possible. And as she's sitting down, she goes, "By the way, it looks like someone from Sweden's trying to text you. And it looks like Ben List, who was the other winner, is also trying to text you." And so I'm lying in bed, and like, what is going on? So I get up, I call Ben List, and he says, "Dave, it's happening." And I'm like, "What's happening?" He goes, "We won." And I was like, and eventually he wasn't allowed to tell me we had won it, but he was allowed to infer it, basically. So at some point I realized what was going on, and I said, no. And because we have a big Christmas party every year at Princeton, and they do these skits, and they make fun of the professors, and they play huge practical jokes, and this is exactly the kind of practical joke they would have played, exactly the kind. So I was like, and so I'm starting to feel really bad for this guy, Ben List, because obviously he's become embroiled in this. So I explain to him what's going on, and then he says no. And he texts me back afterwards and says, "By the way, I really look forward to getting this with you." And I actually said, no, this is ridiculous. And I bet him $1,000 that this was a huge. And he was very generous and said, "That's great. We'll be able to have dinner together." And I show it in my general public talk. I show the text, and I wrote back, "No, going back to sleep. Cheers." And I went back to sleep. I went back to sleep for about 45 minutes, and then I woke up, and I was like, well, I wonder who did win the Nobel Prize. So I went down to the kitchen, and on the kitchen counter of a laptop, I opened up the laptop, I went to the front of the New York Times, and I never thought I'd ever see my name in the New York Times, especially not for good reasons. And so there it was, and it was just this amazing sort of kind of crazy moment. And I went back upstairs, and I went to my wife. I said, "Jean," and she's really upset at this point. I'm like, "Jean." She goes, "What?" I says, "I think I won a Nobel Prize." And she said, "What the hell?" Except she didn't say hell, she used another word. And then she got up, and she came down to the kitchen and checked it, and to make sure I was not hallucinating. And so then we went up, woke up my 16-year-old daughter, brought her down, which is not easy at that time in the morning. She checked it, and then we did a dance in the kitchen together. We did this sort of crazy dance. So it was a really beautiful sort of, I always get kind of a little bit sentimental talking about it, and I'm sorry for banging on about it, but it was a really unique and interesting moment. Yeah.
Sounds great. And maybe then to post-Nobel Prize, how has your life changed, Frances, since that award in 2018?
My kids started doing their own dishes.
Oh, so that's what it takes. Okay. Okay, I'll mental note. But of course, you've...
No, I've been offered many different kinds of interesting opportunities. I've taken a few of them. I run the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology for Joe Biden. 3.5 years of that, I'm pretty exhausted, but it's very interesting to see how science influences policymaking and to play a role in that.
Yeah, and what are the key things that you're looking at, presumably impact of AI?
I tell you, Pat, it is makes my head explode. Science is everywhere. Science is everything. Climate change, extreme weather, patient safety, public health, you name it, science is an important part of it, and the council is considering it.
Well, I think they're lucky to have someone like you as the co-chair, there's no doubt. Dave, what about you? How's your life changed since then?
Yeah, I mean, it changes in all these weird and wonderful and bizarre ways, some very positive, some not so positive, but I'd say the vast majority of them are positive. Lots of responsibilities, lots of things you get asked to do, way more things you could ever possibly do. Tremendous access to lots of people around the world. All of a sudden, for no good reason, celebrities want to talk to you, which is also...
Alex Ferguson called you up.
Alex Ferguson invites you to his house and you go hang out with him and you talk to William Shatner and all these other weird, bizarre things. So it affords all these sort of unique, different things. I think one of the things is really important is you kind of realize along the way, it took me probably about 18 months to figure this out, but you realize it's a job in an interesting way. It's an extra job that you've got, and you can do it your way, or you can do it a bad way, or you can do it a good way, and you have to decide what that job is. And at some point you realize you want to try and do good, at least how you view what good is. You want to do good with it. So you try your best to get involved with things which you think are going to be beneficial broadly, at least what you think is going to be beneficial. So, but it is a wild ride. It still is a wild ride, actually.
But you set up a scholarship in honour of your parents. So how has that gone over the last number of years?
That's been amazing, actually. So what happened was, so I'll do this really quickly, but there's the number one media anything show in Scotland is not a TV show, it's a radio show. It's these two guys on a Saturday and a Sunday who are really into football, and they just make fun of everybody. They make fun of everything, and it's got a huge audience. And so my only goal in life was to try and get on this show. So after I won the Nobel Prize, they invited me on the show, which was like my dream come true, was to go on this show. And it was beautiful because they immediately just started making fun of me. So their first question was, so you won it with this guy, Ben List, and he's from Germany. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, be honest, you stole the idea from the German boy. I mean, that was on national radio. It was their first question. Anyway, but while I was on it, they started making fun of the money that you win, which was $500,000. And they said, so you're going to buy your sister a new patio and things like that, you know?
Sure, yeah.
And I said, actually, we've taken all the money and we've created a foundation with it to give to underprivileged teenagers and students in Scotland who are trying to get to university or to stay in university. And at first they were kind of shocked, and then they get into it. And by complete good fortune, there was a journalist at the BBC who was sitting in the canteen listening to the show, and she wrote it up as a big story, and it went all over the world, actually, that day, which was incredible. It went viral, and so all these people from, especially in the US, started giving us money for this foundation, which has grown and grown and grown. And now every year we give a grant, every December, to places in Scotland to help kids. And it's not an enormous amount of money in the grand scheme, but the good news is it is having an impact on the way the Scottish government are thinking about what they're doing with the money, which is something we've been really excited about. And to be perfectly honest, I've learned an enormous amount about what you can actually do in a very small way, which actually can make a difference. It's been really good.
Yeah, well done, that's super. And the knighthood, so under whose sword did you bow?
Yeah, so I got a knighthood, and so that was it was the Queen who gave it to me, but it was Prince William who was the person who did it. And you know, when you get knighted, you go in, and it was at Buckingham Palace, and they let you walk around Buckingham Palace, which is kind of bizarre. You're letting Scottish people run around Buckingham Palace is really very precarious. My whole family was going nuts. Anyway. So I went in and I had to do the knighthood thing, and they did that, and they put the medal around. And then I had to talk to Prince William for about 10 minutes. And someone had prepped him on chemistry and what we do, except they hadn't done a very good job. So they were saying to me, so you're the guy who's getting all the plastics out the ocean, which is not true whatsoever. But I was very nervous, so I just went, yes, we are. And in the back of my head, there's a voice going, why are you lying to Prince William? Anyway, but my daughters were just blown away by how handsome he was. And the Buckingham Palace press corps, I just get this amazing photograph, I wish I could show it, of my youngest daughter who's just got eyes going through her skull about how unbelievably handsome she thought he was. And so, yeah, it was a fun day. It was a good day.
Great. And Frances, no knighthoods, unfortunately, in the US system?
No, I haven't been knighted.
No. Not even a foreign
But I've met
knight.
many presidents.
Well, I think that's equally important. Great. So you mentioned, Frances, at your lecture today about having a starring role in the Big Bang Theory. but one of the
Not
items...
starring, cameo.
Okay, cameo role, but for the time period, it was a starring role. So the Big Bang Theory, I think everyone in the audience does look at it, and I suppose the first question is, do you think Sheldon deserves the Nobel Prize or not?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. Yeah, no, I think we'll all vote for that. And but something else featured on the Big Bang Theory that's actually very close to your own family as well, and that was the Mars rover. So would you maybe tell the audience a little bit about your connection to the Mars rover? And I hope everyone knows
Now
about the
we're
Mars
really
rover.
getting personal.
Yeah. Sorry.
My oldest son, who never went to university, joined the Army when he got out of high school and became an aviation technician. And when he left the Army in 2016, he went to build with his hands the Mars rover. And he put it on the rocket in 2021 and sent it off to Mars. And he said, "Mom, I have the best job in the solar system."
How impressive is that? That is really impressive. So Dave, have you featured on any newspapers recently, like The Sun or The Times, and what exactly are they talking
We were
about?
just talking about that back. No, I actually thought about giving that answer to the thing about how has your life changed. One of the weird things for me is still getting used to, like in America, nobody cares who I am at all, and probably no one cares in the UK either. But there's certain journalists in the UK who keep writing up stories about me, which is fine. But there's just you suddenly realise that you can't. You've got to be a little bit more careful than you should be sometimes. I'll give you two quick examples. One was I was down in Brazil doing a Nobel dialogue thing, and they asked me a question about skepticism and science. And I said, it's kind of crazy skepticism in science if you think about it. And I went on to say that, one of probably the greatest accomplishments scientifically in the last 20 years easily has been the rollout of the vaccines. Producing the vaccines rollout is probably the greatest accomplishment. It's unbelievable. And the fact that scientists and science doesn't get the credit it deserves for that is like mind-blowing to me. And I said, sometimes I think maybe part of it is because the scientists were not always the best at communicating to the general public, but that doesn't take away from what the actual accomplishment actually was. It was all this. Anyway, the Times of London write this big article about it, saying MacMillan says scientists are bad at communication and that caused skepticism about the vaccines, which is completely not what I said.
God.
And you're just like, really? And so the COVID inquiry people in Britain then got in contact with me and wanted me to come and testify in front of them about what scientists were doing wrong. And I had to basically explain to them, this is completely ridiculous and overblown. So that's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, I was at the Euros 2 weeks ago watching Scotland play, which was unfortunate.
Not very well.
If you know the scores. Anyway,
Sorry.
But I was there and it was an amazing party. It's 200,000 Scottish people in Munich. And I bumped into some high school friends, which is completely ridiculous. And they were drinking this really bad Scottish wine. It's not Scottish, but it's a really bad wine. It's called Buckfast. Anyway, when I was a kid, I used to drink Buck. So I thought I'll have a swig. And so I had a swiggy Buckfast, and someone took a picture of it. And I get back to America about 6 days later, and it's in the Sun about Nobel Prize winner drinking Buckfast at the Scotland game. God. And I'm like, well, that's the two ends of the spectrum. One end, you're being asked to go to the COVID inquiry, and the other one saying you're a wino, So the one of the things you learn is you can't control it, and you've just got to you have to be a little bit smarter sometimes about what you're actually doing. So I'm trying.
But then you can just say it's all lies, right?
Well, it's hard when the photograph is right there.
AI.
That's true.
That's right. Fake photo, fake news. So perhaps in the interest of time, we might wrap up there if that's okay. And can I, on behalf of everyone here, please thank Dave and Francis for a really superb evening. I hope you enjoyed it. I have to say, I certainly did. So thank you all very much. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you. Thank you.
And before we go, can I thank Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan, the Executive Director of the Royal Irish Academy, and Ellie Cullen and all the staff in the Academy for all the work they've put into preparing this. And I should also point out that this is a Royal Society of Chemistry event as well. And thanks to Dr. Helen Payne, Professor Jill Reid, L.A. Palermo, and all of the colleagues in the Royal Society of Chemistry, and they will have a reception ready for us outside. At this stage, I'll ask my son Shane to come forward with a very small gift for our two. So you don't get away scot-free in this thing. Thanks, Shane. So the first thing is a hurling ball, right? Signed for the day. So we talked about that. So there's one each. Hurling, by the way, in America means something completely different to hurling. So one each. So that's our national sport, and the semi-finals were on over the weekend. And a final gift then to you both. And the first one is an Irish jersey. And I figured that, you know, Francis is very much a midfield dynamo. So this is the number 7 shirt for the ladies' soccer team.
Oh, nice.
So I'll give that to you. So as you cycle in and out to Caltech every day, you can wear that, and I'm sure that'll be the start of many conversations. Now, in 2005, I was very brave and actually presented Dave with a Glasgow Celtic jersey. Now, for a Rangers fan, that doesn't always necessarily go down very well. So I thought I'd play it safe and go for another Irish jersey. So if you don't mind, open it up, please, Dave. This is a number 10 shirt, because I'm sure Ali McCoist is his favourite forward of all time. So there's the MacMillan number 10 Irish jersey. So that will go with the Glasgow Celtic jersey. I'll collect those afterwards and bring them back. Okay, so with that, Gorv Mila Mahogwood, many thanks to you all, and enjoy the rest of the evening, and thank you very much for attending. Thank you.